The wind cut through the downtown streets like ice when Claire Morgan saw the man take off his only coat and wrap it around his daughter's shoulders. The little girl could not have been older than 8. Her hands were trembling, her cheeks were red from the cold, and she kept trying to push the coat back toward her father because she could see him shivering too. But he zipped it around her anyway, rubbed her arms, and kept walking as if the freezing air did not matter. Claire watched from the back seat of her heated car while her driver waited at a red light. She had spent the evening leaving a charity gala where people had donated millions to help struggling families. Yet there, only a few feet away, a single father was quietly giving his daughter the one thing keeping him warm. Something about the scene made Claire tell her driver not to move when the light turned green. Instead, she watched the father and child disappear down a side street, and then made a decision that would change all 3 of their lives. If you believe kindness still matters and that people deserve second chances when life has pushed them to the edge, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Dad's Hope. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may be fighting battles no one else can see. The father's name was James Miller, and the girl wrapped inside his coat was his daughter, Sophie. James had been raising her alone since his wife died 4 years earlier. Before that, his life had been ordinary in the best possible way. He worked as a building maintenance technician, his wife worked part-time at a daycare center, and together they rented a small apartment close to Sophie's school. They never had much money, but they had enough. After his wife's death, enough became harder to define. James reduced his hours for months because Sophie struggled with grief. The rent rose. Medical bills from his wife's final treatment followed him like a shadow. His savings disappeared. By the time he returned to full-time work, the company that employed him had already begun cutting staff. 3 weeks before Claire saw them on the street, James lost his job. He did not tell Sophie immediately. He woke at the same time every morning, dressed in his old work clothes, and left the apartment as if nothing had changed. He spent the day applying for jobs at libraries, cafes, public computers, and employment centers, then returned in the evening with whatever groceries he could afford. Sophie knew something was wrong, but she did not ask too many questions. Children often recognize the shape of worry before they understand its name. That night, James and Sophie had walked nearly 2 miles because he could no longer justify paying for the bus. They had gone to a community center offering free meals, but by the time they arrived most of the food was gone. Sophie ate a bowl of soup. James told her he was not hungry. On the walk home, the temperature dropped. Sophie began shivering. James gave her his coat. Claire watched all of it from the car. She was the founder and CEO of Morgan Capital, a private investment company that owned several commercial properties across the city. She had built her fortune from a small real estate business started in her 20s and had become known for being disciplined, strategic, and almost impossible to impress. She donated generously to charities and sat on boards dedicated to housing and education. But charity, for Claire, had slowly become something abstract. Numbers on spreadsheets. Pledges announced at dinners. Photographs taken beside oversized checks. Watching James hand over his coat felt different. Claire told her driver to follow from a distance. She knew it was unusual, perhaps even intrusive, but something inside her would not let the moment go. James and Sophie eventually entered an aging apartment building on a narrow side street. Claire recognized the address. Morgan Capital owned the property. She felt a strange discomfort. The building was part of a portfolio her company had acquired the previous year. She knew the occupancy rate, average rent, renovation budget, and projected return. She did not know who lived there. The next morning, Claire asked her property division for information about the building. She learned that several tenants had complained about unreliable heat. Repairs had been delayed because the building was scheduled for renovation the following spring. Claire stared at the maintenance notes. Unreliable heat. Then she thought about Sophie shivering. She asked whether any tenant named James Miller lived there. There was. His rent was 12 days late. A formal warning had already been prepared. Claire felt sick. The company that had sponsored a charity gala the night before was preparing to threaten eviction against a recently unemployed single father living in a building where the heat barely worked. She cancelled the warning. But she knew simply erasing one late notice would not solve anything. 2 days later, James received a knock on his apartment door. He opened it expecting the property manager. Claire stood outside. James recognized her vaguely from business advertisements but could not place her. She introduced herself and explained that her company owned the building. James immediately assumed she was there because of the late rent. He began apologizing. He said he had interviews scheduled and would catch up as soon as possible. Claire stopped him. She told him she had seen him and Sophie walking home 2 nights earlier. James's face changed. Embarrassment replaced fear. He did not want pity. Claire could see that immediately. So she did not offer money. Instead, she asked what kind of work he had done. James told her about maintenance, electrical repairs, plumbing, HVAC systems, and 7 years of experience managing apartment repairs. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of what she was hearing. Her company owned dozens of properties. And one of her tenants, struggling to keep his daughter warm, had exactly the skills her property division desperately needed. The maintenance department had been short-staffed for months. Claire arranged an interview. She made it clear that she would not control the hiring decision. James would have to qualify. He did. The hiring manager called him one of the strongest candidates they had seen all year. A week later, James began work as a senior maintenance technician for Morgan Properties. His first assignment was not his own building. Claire insisted on that. She wanted him to be treated like an employee, not a charity case. But within his first month, James identified several recurring maintenance problems across the company's older properties. He proposed a preventive inspection system that caught heating failures before tenants had to complain. The program was eventually adopted across the entire portfolio. James's salary was higher than his old job. He caught up on rent. He bought groceries without counting every item. And when winter deepened, Sophie received a new coat. James bought one for himself too. But Claire's life changed as much as theirs. After reviewing the building where James lived, she ordered inspections across every older Morgan property. She discovered delayed repairs, confusing complaint systems, and budget decisions that looked efficient on paper but created miserable conditions for tenants. Claire had never intended for people to live that way. That did not make her less responsible. She changed the policy. Emergency heating repairs became mandatory within 24 hours during winter. Maintenance staffing increased. Rent assistance programs were redesigned so struggling tenants could request temporary help before receiving formal warnings. Then Claire began doing something she had not done in years. She visited her own properties. Not for photographs. Not with investors. She spoke to residents. She listened. Several months later, she stopped by James's building during a routine visit. Sophie came running down the stairs when she recognized her. She was wearing a bright red winter coat. Claire smiled. Sophie proudly told her that her father had fixed the heating system on the 3rd floor that morning. James appeared behind her carrying a toolbox. He looked healthier than the man Claire remembered from the street. But what struck her most was that he seemed lighter. Not wealthy. Not transformed into someone else. Simply no longer afraid of every unexpected expense. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need a reminder that compassion should lead to action, and subscribe to Dad's Hope. Sometimes noticing one person's struggle can expose a problem affecting hundreds of others. Before we end, please comment, kindness should become action, if you believe seeing someone in need means more when we are willing to do something about it. Years later, James still remembered the night he gave Sophie his coat. He remembered the cold, the empty streets, and the fear of returning to an apartment he might soon lose. He never knew Claire had been watching from a warm car until much later. By then, the moment had become something entirely different to both of them. To James, it was proof that protecting his daughter had always mattered more than his own comfort. To Claire, it was the night she finally understood the difference between helping people from a distance and actually seeing the lives hidden behind the numbers. She had spent years believing generosity was measured by how much someone gave. James taught her that sometimes the greatest generosity is giving when you have almost nothing left.